Good afternoon, everyone. It's time to seek a chair in the shade. You'll all be pleased to know that we are offering free hose down services. We'll start up the garden hose and we'll let you run through it. Anyone who wants to do it. You going to be first? Yeah, okay. So, those of you in the barn, I think it would be nice of you to meander into the tent. Maybe you can't hear that because the speaker's going the other way. But I'm Robert Cheney. I'm the executive director here at Willard, and I'd like to welcome you all to Willard, although I wish it wasn't for the reasons that we're here. But I'm so glad to see such a wonderful turnout for such a terrific guy. And it's greatly appreciated that you've come. But please join us at some other time. Leave us your email address or leave us some indication that you're interested in the passions of David Gow, because that's what we do here. So we'd love to see all of you again. And for those of you in the barn, you may be missing the real opening remarks by Burgess Gow. So thank you again, and we'll put Burgess up next.
We've described my dad, and will be described my dad in many ways: machinist, a clockmaker, man of God, husband, father. Um, in all the ways we will describe him. A hobbyist or a man of curiosity may be the word to describe him, but that just doesn't do it. He became a master at so many things. He was the source of information that we could go to. But then that doesn't really describe him all that well either. He was a man of passion. How many things that we talked about and will talk about today did he relay his passion onto you? Was it beekeeping, clocks, God, woodworking, music, sailing? So I'm hoping today that that is what we hear about. All of the joyful moments, a joke. That's what we need to hear today, his passion for life. So we're going to try and move the microphone around, or you can come up here. I'll try and guide it. Speak from the heart and enjoy the shade. And, um, you know, we're going to do our best here. So I'm going to just propose a toast. Maybe you don't have it. It's okay. But I made a toast here. Here's to my dad. He's a spark living inside of all of us. He is cheering for us now like he did at my cross-country races. He's challenging us to be our best when we're at our worst. He's still questioning our morals in a way that only he could. He's telling us to lend a hand when no one else will. Here's to a life well lived. It's my dad. Cheers. Okay. Here's to my dad. Larry asked for that. I think that's cheers. Okay. Can you not hear it? Okay. Um, we have a list of people that I have asked, but if anyone would like to say something first, we break the ice. Oh, Bruce Airy. If you could maybe just quick let him know how you describe Dad, and then I believe I was a friend of David's for over 30 years, and we met at church. And then I knew he was into sailing, and I always wanted to be into sailing. And my wife and I, Debbie, blamed David and Barbara for the reason we bought a sailboat. So we blamed it all on him. And I can remember so many times when David would help me out when something was wrong with the boat, because he was very mechanically minded, and he would just get into something and just tear it apart, and and I would never be able to do that. I was so cautious about I wouldn't be able to get it back together again. I can remember one time Barbara and David were going on our sailboat on a trip, and there was something wrong with the throttle, which is located in the pedestal where you steer the boat. And soon after we left the marina, something was happening that we couldn't go any further unless something was fixed in there. So David proceeded to take the whole pedestal apart. We didn't even go back to the marina. I think we maybe anchored. I'm not sure what we did, but he had the whole thing apart in a matter of maybe half an hour or so. He fixed what was wrong with it. I mean, that's the way he was. He just would dive into something and just fix it for you. So that's one story about David. Thank you, Bruce. Anyone? Who's next? Before I'm going to start asking. There we go. It shouldn't be this hard.
Thank you, Burgess. I'm Jim, and my wife Mary is at the back here, and we've known David and Barbara for over 30 years now. I came across here with my wife Mary back in '85. Now, my wife was a bit of a clock maniac, and she had collected at least half a dozen clocks. And so when we got here, we unloaded these clocks, and one of them was a grandfather clock. Now, my son thought it would be good to wind this thing up, but he wound it up and he kept winding it, and of course it broke. So I decided I'd find a clockmaker to fix it. And through the yellow pages, I found this number, which was David Gow in Shrewsbury. So I called the number and I said, I got this grandfather clock which needs repair and restoration. And he said, oh no, I got a lot of work, can't do it for 6 months at least. So I said, I'm in no hurry. So he said, well, how long have you had it? So I said, well, we bought it in Aberdeen. He said, Aberdeen? Wow. You from Aberdeen? No, but we lived on the Western Isles for a couple of years. So he said, oh, maybe I'll take a look. So I said to him, well, I can bring it round to you. He said, well, don't bring the whole long case, just take the middle out. So I took the innards out, put it in a cardboard box, and brought it round to David. That's when I first met Barbara, because he showed me to the workshop, and Barbara was there doing her normal thing, making apple pies. Anyway, he took this thing and he said, oh, okay, well, we'll have a look, but it'll be a few months. 6 weeks later, I got this call. David Gow here, I got your clock fixed. I'll come and set it up. So I said, oh, okay. Well, unbeknown to Mary, my wife, she didn't know I'd taken the innards out of her clock, and she had not missed it. So David arrives on the doorstep with the innards of this clock, and she said, oh, I've not noticed it. So he sets it up, and Mary says to him, well, I wish I'd known, because I'd like to see you do it. So David, being his educated himself, he said, well, you can come another time and have a look. And then from that time, Mary worked with him in the workshop for a number of years, and learned a bit about trade of mending the clocks. And so we have a house full of clocks which go tick-tock and chime every day. Thanks, everyone. That was David.
Thank you, Jim. Lou, did I see you stand up? Or Sandra back there? Oh, Mary.
Well, I hope you can all hear me. I'm quiet spoken normally. But Burgess and Callum were playing, Dad said. And he said they've got some Coke bottles and making homemade pops. And they were outside throwing and going bang. That's all right. And boys will be boys. Anyway, later in the day, David had this clock face to clean, and he couldn't get it in the cleansing tank, so he made this little tray to fit this clock face. Anyway, he put some mixture that he'd mixed up into this tray and put the clock face in, and smoke started coming off of it. And he said, "You know that story I told you this morning about the boys? I think I'm doing it now." Anyway, I had to run ahead. He said, "I can't let it go off in the workshop. I can't let it go off in the house. You run ahead and open the back door for me, or both doors for me, and I'll try and get it out." Anyway, I ran through and I wedged the one door open, and I had to go outside and hold the other one back because it was on a spring. And he came running out and he threw it, and it went bang. And he started going, "Oh dear, I'm so glad I got that out of the workshop." Never mind the house. But anyway, that's how he was. But boys will be boys. And you saved their house.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. Barb.
Hello, everybody. I want to relate the story when we first met David Gow and how we met David Gow. We went to a Skinner auction and we bought a clock. Not a very good clock, but it was what we could afford. It's still not a good clock. And my husband's father at his sneaker store waited on this man from Scotland, and he was buying sneakers, and he asked him, "Well, what do you do for work?" He said, "Oh, I fix clocks." So my father-in-law said, "Hold on, let me call my son. They just bought a clock, and I think it needs some work." Called us up, gave us the name, David Gow, phone number. My husband called David, and he came over immediately. And I said to my husband, "Well, let's serve them something because we really want him to work on our clock." So I went down to Au Bon Pain because I don't cook. I bought some muffins, made some tea, and we're waiting for David to show up. So I'm looking out. I run to the second story of our home where the clock is, and I'm looking out, and I said, "Oh my God, I think that's them. I think they're going to be expensive because he's driving a Mercedes. I hope we can afford this guy." So Louis said, "Don't worry about it." So he comes with his assistant, who turned out to be Callum. Now, Callum was 12 years old at that time. They come through the front door, very polite. We bring them up to the second floor. Now, Callum's carrying the tool bag. And he went to set it down on the hardwood floor, and David said, "Callum, you have to put a towel down first." That's how David was. He was always very particular and meticulous and careful. And he just gazed at the clock. And I was waiting for him to say, "This isn't worth fixing." But he went up to it, and he opened it up, and he looked, and he said, yeah, I think this clock is a decent clock. I think we can do something with it. So we went back downstairs, and I didn't know if they were going to even like tea, but that's all I know how to make. So I brought out the pot of tea, served the old bone pen muffins, and we had a lovely conversation. And after that, the rest is history. We became good friends. So that's how we first met David. And I'm going to miss him so much.
Um, Lee Robinson.
All right, this isn't anything I planned on, but I figure it's important.
The ones you don't plan on.
Yeah, I've known David, I guess, for 25 years, as long as he's been at the museum. And those of you who don't know me, my parents, Roger and Imogene Robinson, are the founders and brains behind this museum. Uh, so, like I said, I met David probably 25 years ago, and I knew him from the museum, and I'd be over here, and he'd be over here. And my mother was here for 25 years, maybe a little longer, every day. And my father, who was a physician, had to work all week, as a doctor. So he had time off on his day off was Sunday, and so he needed time to relax. So he'd spend the whole day over here doing tours, because that's what my mother had him do. So he was very close to David too, and the respect that my parents had for David, and David had for both of them, my mother on a daily basis, and particularly my father, was something I will never forget. On a personal level, my wife and I actually got to spend some quality time with David a number of years ago, and I hadn't spent a lot of time away from the museum. I knew what he did, and he fixed a few of our clocks, because obviously we still own a few Willard clocks that haven't made it over here yet. So he would take care of those, and he fixed the broken table that for my wife and I at the house, an antique table. It's a beautiful table that the leg got just busted off of. And his woodworking skills. That's when I knew that he was a woodworker. The job he did on that was just blew my mind. So we got to know him a little better, and I remember the first time I ever got like one-on-one with him was in my retirement years. I was working in a shop on Route 9 over in Northborough, kind of hanging around. It was something to do. And middle of a blizzard, I'm standing looking out at Route 9, and there's nobody around. And I look up the road, headed eastbound. There's this Mercedes coming down in the middle of the blizzard, and it's driving down Route 9. And I look again, and all of a sudden it's driving down Route 9, but it's going backwards. And I look, and I said, gee, that Mercedes looks familiar. And it goes by the other side of the median backwards, and bang into a snowbank. And I'm watching it. I said, it's odd. So I watch it, and who gets out of it but David? So I sprint across the road and get him over to the shop and warm up, and ended up giving him a ride home. But he could have been less fazed by that whole thing. It was like, yeah, I just ran the Mercedes off the road, but no big deal. So that was when I got to actually know that he was they talk about patience, but nothing really seemed to faze him. And then, of course, my wife and I got to spend some time with him in Florida. He stayed with us for a few days, and I just, every minute you would spend with him, you'd learn something new about him and about his knowledge and his interests and everything. His last day there, he was working on his sailboat. I think the motor or something, and Of course, he dropped an integral part overboard. I've heard a lot of stories about it's not the first part he's dropped overboard, but it seemed to be a theme, I guess. So he spent half the day diving down in 10 or 12 feet of water in the mud until he found the part. But once again, totally unfazed, put the thing together and they sailed off. So that was some of the best memories I've had of him, the days we spent touring the Everglades and driving around with him. And both Barbara and he are just priceless people. So thank you. Oh.
Frank. Absolutely.
I hesitate to bring this story up. We've heard all the great things about David, but actually, sometimes he was a bit of a villain. And I have to tell this story because I was reminded of it today by the other villain in the picture of this particular case. Years ago, we used to go to a men's retreat from our church. We have about 8 or 9 men get together and we go up to a little place somewhere and do our own cooking and look after ourselves. But one evening, we decided we'd go into the local town. I think the motive was to get some ice cream, just to finish up a rough day. When you go to a men's retreat, you've got to sort of go for ice cream rather than other things. But we went into the town and on the main street, we found that there was an art shop that was open for an art display. But this was an invitation by only event. And we looked at this, and this was a really cold night. We were all got our coats and stuff on, but David and this other guy, they were very interested in this. We said, come on, let's go home. It's cold. We've got our ice cream. No. So we sort of walked away. We walked back, and the next thing we realized that both these two guys have talked their way into this art show, invitation only. Somehow they'd wormed their way in, and they were drinking wine, sipping wine and having cheese and looking at all these art displays and so forth. We came by, first shivering ourselves off, saying, hey, come on, let's go. They look at the window and go back talking to the other people. I mean, this nice, friendly guy that's humble and does things for everybody, he just left us in the cold. I'm not sure whether we left them there, but eventually I guess we drove them out. But don't forget, you can be a villain sometimes.
Okay, maybe Kathy Aloni? Kathy? Where are you? We're going to do maybe 20 more minutes. We'll take a break. Sound okay? Okay. Short break, and then we'll get back to it.
So, hi. I have had the privilege of knowing David and Barbara for 35 years. I think we figured the math sometimes, and it's about 35 years. And obviously, over the course of that many years, there's 100 different stories that I could tell. We have, my husband Ephraim and I have had the privilege of traveling with them, the pleasure of traveling with them to Israel and to Italy and many places locally. And the thing with David, and I'm sure all of you will agree and understand this, is that he was a great storyteller. And there are people who are really good at telling stories, and that's it. They're good at telling stories, and it's sort of a one-way street, and there's not a give and take. But with David, it was always, he was telling you a story, but...
Sorry.
I don't yodel.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button.
Yes. So with David, it was a two-way street. He was telling a story, but at the same time, he was giving you an opportunity to ask a question or to share some of your story. And that, I think, is just one of the greatest gifts. We have, Barbara and I are really good at pulling a meal together. We'll be on the phone 10 minutes later. It's like, okay, yeah, I got Sally. Oh, I got the, yep, okay, there we are. Their house, our house, whatever. And one of the last times that they were at our home, um, we were sitting, we had finished eating, and we were sitting, and David was talking. And he got talking about Scotland, his very early years, some of his earliest childhood memories. And he just we let him go, and he just went on, and it was amazing. It was wonderful. He had a very far away look at times, and it was just a blessing knowing Barb and David. For all of us, it's a blessing. I just chose a poem, Sea Fever. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, John Masefield. I must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea in the sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by. And the wheels kick, and the wind song, and the white sails shaking, and a gray mist on the sea's face, and a gray dawn breaking. I must go down to the seas again, for the call of the running tide is a wild call, and a clear call that may not be denied. And all I ask is a windy day, with the white clouds flying, and the flung spray, and the blown spume, and the seagulls crying. I must go down to the seas again, to the vagrant gypsy life, to the gull's way and the whale's way, where the wind's like a whetted knife, and all I ask is a merry yarn from a laughing fellow rover, and quiet sleep and a sweet dream when the long trick's over.
John. If you stand back here a little bit, you're in the shade. Or forward.
Yeah. Thank you.
John, come forward.
Colin asked me to make some remarks about David as a clockmaker. There aren't a lot of us around, but he and I were both and are both clockmakers. I don't remember when I first met David. It's years ago, and it was a pleasure from the beginning. We had so much in common. I want to cut short my remarks, and I'll begin. The Willard clock, tower clock, that's in this museum. David contacted me when the museum needed to restore the clock to see if I would work on it with him. I had some bigger machinery and a much bigger workshop, so we moved the clock into my shop and started to restore it. It was a fun project for both of us for a lot of reasons. There are several things I would point out to you. First of all, if you go in the museum, you'll see that that clock is on a very elegant wooden frame, elevating it high enough so that you can have the pendulum below and the weights coming down, similar to what it would have been, the way it would have been erected in a church tower. The frame that it's on was a log in his driveway until he went to work on it with an axe and a chainsaw and more refined equipment. And there you see the product of his skill as a cabinet maker. One of the projects that we had to do on the clock was to replace a missing foot. We both had to do some contriving for that because those are rather large iron frames that hold the clock together. What we did was get a dolly and put it underneath part of the frame and then bolt some of it onto a milling machine, and we cut a dovetail where a broken foot was missing. We then went to the junkyard, found a piece of cast iron, made that fit the dovetail that we had cut into the iron frame, and David went home with it. I invite you to go look at that clock and tell me which foot he made. He spent a weekend carving out of a piece of cast iron. So now we have a cabinet maker and we have a cast iron clockmaker, carving clockmaker, if you will. We did have one interesting experience. we had a power washer and hot water on a hydrant in my yard. And the first thing we had to do to clean those frames up, which incidentally, so some people have accused us of otherwise, that is the original paint on there. We were able to restore it. And we cleaned it with hot water and power washer. And it was in March, and both our cars were filthy. I said, hey, while we're at it, let's do our cars. And we did. It was when we finished with David's black Land Rover and then had to get all the water out of the inside that I think he decided it was time to replace that car. That took care of that part of the job. There's one other project. I'm cutting short several things I was going to tell you. There is a quick story, though, I want to tell you. There is a Scottish clockmaker in Vermont, calls himself the British clockmaker, Ray Bates. Many years ago, he worked for me. We've remained good friends, and I thought two Scottish clockmakers need to meet. So we got in a car and went up to Vermont, Newfane one day to visit Ray. I introduced them. Ray's son works for his father. Ray's son and I went in another room and left those two to their own. They started with a Scottish dialect, and Richard and I had no idea what they were saying. So we left them alone for their meeting. We did get a good lunch out of that afterwards. The other thing I'm going to point out to you, we've heard so many things about David's character that it at least establishes it as truth, and I'm not going to repeat them all. But he was a man that wasn't afraid to say, I don't know, when that was the fact. Not everybody can do that. There was a lot he didn't know, and there was a lot he intended to find out. I want to point some things out to you. On that clock, you see some beautiful inlay. That's called a Massachusetts shelf clock. You don't see too many of those in Scotland, but he was making them, making several of them. He did all that woodwork. It's magnificent work if anybody is qualified to judge, and that certainly is. So there's a cabinet maker. Now, the mechanism is made by a clockmaker. But at the time those clocks were made, and David wanted to be as authentic as possible, he started to learn what's called the molding trade, because the pieces for the movement of that clock and the finial decoration on the top of that case were made from cast brass. That means molten metal is poured into a form. When it cools, you machine it and shape it into what it's intended to be. If David had had more time, he would have been a master molder. He was already turning out castings. There's some laying on that table that he made. He was very good at it, and in a very short time. I kind of suspect that if he'd had a little more time, there is a fourth part to making that clock, the dial. How many people would agree with me that he probably would have taken a course at the Mass College of Art and decided to learn how to paint dials as well? So he practiced with great skill 4 trades. He was a cabinet maker, he was a clock maker, he became a molder, and if he could paint dials, he would have made every part of that clock. There's so much more I could tell you. My personal relationship with him was long and close, and I miss him. He was a good friend, a reinforcement for me, because, as I say, there aren't too many of us, and we did at least have something in common to talk about. And so I'm sorry he's gone. I'm also sorry that not he, nor I, nor several other clockmakers I know have a total heir or apprentice. We each worked at our trade and didn't teach enough. And I'm sorry he doesn't have an heir, but somebody will come along. He has preserved an ancient trade, and so several others of us, and it will continue. I wish somebody could have had him for a teacher. They would have learned an awful lot. And he was one of the best clockmakers in this area or in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, for those words. You said so much that I'm having trouble relaying sometimes today and often. Dr. Irwin?
Thank you. I'm Richard Irwin, and I was a customer of David's. I first met David 30 years ago when a family heirloom on my wife's side, an antique Scottish grandmother's clock from the 1780s, decided to stop running. In those days, as someone else had mentioned, the first place for us to look was in the Yellow Pages, and that's where I found a way of contacting David. He came to our house and got the clock running. He was a delightful person to speak with, and we talked for a while after he fixed the clock. It was probably a year later that another family heirloom on my wife's side, a New Haven mantel clock, stopped working, and that gave me the opportunity to visit the Gow home when I dropped that clock off to be repaired. While there, Barbara offered me a cup of tea and some cookies. I noticed those cookies there, delicious. And David showed me around his house and shop. I was mesmerized by his stories and the love he had for his clockwork. When I fell in love with a Waltham banjo clock that was hanging on a wall in their dining room, the Gows were willing to part with it and sold it to me. Partly because I always liked talking with David and being offered tea and cookies by Barbara, and partly because my wife and I wanted antique clock presents for each of our 4 daughters on their first-year marriage anniversaries, and partly because our clocks would occasionally need to be tuned up. I would visit the Gows' home multiple times over the next 26 years. Most recently, in the past 2 years, when a very old lock on an antique desk of mine broke, with the drawer in the closed position, I called David and asked if he knew of anyone who might be able to fix the lock. He said that would be me. He immediately dropped what he was doing and came over, got the drawer open, took the drawer home, and fixed the lock by remaking it. Shortly after the lock problem, when I learned that David had become ill, I had the opportunity to visit him and Barbara. And as you might have guessed, I was offered tea and cookies on one occasion and ice cream on another. During those times, David and Barbara shared his and her stories, how they met, how David got interested in fixing clocks, and their love of sailing. As I've had time to reflect upon David's life, I thought of the Jewish proverb that states that each day of one's life can be thought of as a page in a book. And that being the case, the story of David's life has much to teach us all. He was kind, caring, religious, humble, soft-spoken, and he was generous. He also was passionate about life. David was not just my clock guy. He also was my friend, and I shall miss him greatly. Thank you for listening to me.
Thanks so much, Dr. Irwin. I kind of need a break. So why don't we take maybe just till after 1 o'clock, and we can return and we'll keep going. Is that okay? Yep. I'm sorry, 2 o'clock. I think I should know how to read time here. So let's get some snacks, take a break, and if you need to leave, what I'm realizing now is how special this live stream is going to be to me. So, Maria, if you could, or whenever, or we do it. Why don't we do it while we get to return? That sounds good. Okay, so we'll have Maria sing again for us to return. All the stories and the moments here are just what I am needing, and I just have to assume that's what we're all needing. So I'm loving this. We're going to start with Maria Fronte again. Test, test.
Thank you, Burgess. I'm so inspired by everyone's stories today. And I met Barb and David through a mutual friend, Ann Barlow, and I was getting ready to produce another CD, and there was a beautiful Scottish sea shanty, and I didn't know where to go to get some help. But of course, David, and again, he helped in another capacity. So he helped me understand and teach me how to pronounce some of these words.
The stars are burning cheerily, cheerily. Oro maridu, turn ye to me. The seamew is moaning drearily, drearily. Oro maridu, turn ye to me. Cold is the storm wind that ruffles his breast, but warm are the downy plumes lining his nest. Cold blows the storm there, soft falls the snow there. Oro maridu, turn ye to me. The waves are dancing merrily, merrily. Oro maridu, turn ye to me. The seabirds are wailing wearily, wearily. Oro maridu, turn ye to me. Hushed be thy moaning, lone bird of the sea. Thy home on the rocks is the shelter to thee. Thy host the angry wave, mine but the lonely grave. Oro maridu, turn ye, turn ye, turn ye to me.
All right. Don Hare, we're going to ask to speak, I know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The way I got to know David was through a group of us that lived in Woodstock, Connecticut. And there was a Howard tower clock in the local congregational church. And there was a group of us. Oh, excuse me, the academy building. It wasn't the church building, it was the academy building. I stand corrected. But at any rate, a group of us decided to restore it, or perhaps I should say resurrect it. It was in bad condition from age, lack of care, and should we say quantities of deposits from pigeons. But at any rate, we proceeded to tackle a project, and somebody said, well, you ought to get hold of a fellow in Worcester who knows all about clocks. And thus we got involved with David. My job in the project was to produce a new set of hands, numeral, minute bits. And so I found some good redwood in the top of an attic in a lumberyard in Worcester and proceeded to make these hands, copying some old Howard hands, and then turned them over to a couple of village ladies who proceeded to gild them
Well, they did a beautiful job, and they were installed on the clock, and we got the clock up and running with a lot of guidance from David. But the sequel to that is that some years later, the academy building needed paint, so they decided to paint the major building, and so they turned the paint loose. What did he do? He painted all the hands gray. Can you believe it? He must have been a brilliant painter.
Yeah.
But at any rate, that's how we got to know David, and one thing led to another, and he restored and repaired a lot of clocks for us over the years. And then I started building clock cases and found various kinds and qualities of works to put in them. And David was always a help when one of these didn't work. Now, I'm not going to go on and tell you what a wonderful guy David was. I think you heard from people who knew him much better than I did this morning, and there's no question he was just about walk on water. But one thing I don't think was that his better half got all the acclaim that she should have. And I want to tell you, she's been a wonderful mother to two boys, a wonderful wife to David, a great cook and homemaker, and probably the world's finest baker of shortbread.
You better believe it.
But I won't blow you much anymore. I just want to say that David was a Renaissance man, a man of many skills and a fine workman and a curious and an expert on a variety of things, not just clockmaking, but from boating to beekeeping. I think that at this point, all I say is I really enjoyed knowing David for the many years I knew him, and he was a wonderful person and a great friend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don. Robert?
Thank you. I've been thinking about saying a few words about David for a long time, and I had it all organized. It's in my notebook right behind me, but you can throw that all out the window because everybody has said it all. But let me tell you about the last time I spoke to David. when David when David was diagnosed with his rare illness, he still, whenever possible, would come into the museum on Fridays, which was his tradition. And after he did his work in the museum, he would come upstairs and sit in my office in the nice air conditioning, and we'd just talk about almost anything. He offered me his resignation, which I said, no, you should not count yourself out so quickly. I said, there's no great emergencies that you have to tend to right away here, but you will maintain your position here as conservator of clocks until we know for sure that you're no longer able to do this work. And he says, well, that's very kind. And the next Friday he would come and we'd talk about sailing. And I couldn't believe some of those adventures were just unbelievable that you two went on, Barbara. And I got to say that I'm sorry I missed the sailboat adventures, but I usually get very seasick on board a boat. So I didn't want to vomit all over his boat. I thought that would be off to the wrong start. But finally, the last visit that he made to me was hours before he passed away. And he came up and he sat in front of me and we talked just like we had always talked before. And then we got around to his illness, and I think he had just had treatment the day before. And, you know, he was in a very sad place. So I tried real hard to cheer him up. but it didn't look like I was going to break through there. And he told me, Robert, I think I'm done. And at that point, I had realized that his illness had gotten the best of him, and he knew it. So when it was time to leave, I looked David right in the eye and I said, David, I love you. And David didn't know what to say. I mean, he was a little bit astounded by that, although he was well versed in the scriptures and the importance of love in dealing with your fellow people. But he just looked at me and nodded his head as if to say, God bless you too. And that was my final words to David hours before he died. David and I had a great relationship. Mainly, I'm a third generation clockmaker, so we could talk clocks, but mainly we both talked clocks enough with clients and all. We didn't need to talk about clocks, so we talked about my hot air ballooning adventures or his sailing adventures and all kinds of subjects when he came. But usually it would get around to where is this museum going for the future? And that is certainly an issue that we on the Board of Trustees here deal with all the time. This is a very minute area of things that people can be interested in. And David was extremely concerned that where is the next generation of interest in a place like the Willard House and Clock Museum? Where are the next clockmakers? Where are the next watchmakers? Where are the next cabinet makers? It's an age coming up that the trades seem to be neglected. People go to college and, major in social studies or something and come out and sit in front of a computer all day, either playing games or that's what they do for business. So David and I were both very, very concerned about the future of the trades of clockmaking, watchmaking, cabinet making. And we on the board are always thinking about that, and we're always eager to have anyone's opinion as to directions that we will go. But the Gow family has done something very generous in setting up the David Gow Memorial Fund for Horological Education. And that fund is going to be used for younger people who want to attend a conference, but didn't have the money to, buy a hotel bill or this sorts of thing, or who wanted to establish an apprenticeship with some master clock or watchmaker who, would have to charge for someone to come and be an apprentice for classroom, for tuition. So we will get together with the family with regularity so that we establish some direction for that fund that can be used to help the next generation. And I think that's a very important step for us to take here at Willard. This, after all, what we're looking at here is the only 18th century clock shop still on its original foundations. So this is a historic structure right here. And it represents a very historic trade and a very important craft. And let me tell you something about the Willards. They started out here as humble craftsmen, but by the time they had moved to Boston and Roxbury, they were the first Henry Fords of America. And there is soon to be additional publications to confirm that. But the Willards, through starting out right here, were the first to use interchangeable parts and principles of mass production, long before Eli Whitney, long before the gun people. But I never read that in my history book. So what I hope to do is to correct the history about the important work that got started right here in the Willard House and Clock Museum. So finally, I would just like to say that I want to live on with the things that were important to David, some of the things that he just did naturally. And it's so important to develop these sorts of things to do naturally. Like one, be a good listener. David was the greatest listener. And I know because there's nothing I like better than the sound of my own voice. And he would listen patiently. We went on a trip one time up to Maine. It was a 4.5 hour drive. I talked nonstop. And I don't think David said a word the whole way other than, And so he was the world's greatest listener. And that's a very important trait that I know I need to develop. And his another trait, he had many traits, but the two that I love is being a great listener and expressing kindness everywhere he went. I did a little search on kindness, found that kindness is talked about well over 100 times in the Bible. So it must have been important for a lot of years. And David expressed motions of kindness just as naturally as he was scratching a mosquito bite. So I'm going to go through my life from here on in David's name, being a kinder, gentler person. And I want everyone to forget if you ever saw me in my shirt that said, I'd be kinder if you'd be smarter. You know, forget that I ever wore that shirt. In David's name, I'm just going to be a kinder individual who is a better listener. So thank you for listening, and God bless David.
Thank you, Robert. I have to thank him personally for me, he has lifted a huge weight off of my shoulders in the journey that we're going to have here. And just knowing that he had such a close personal connection to you with the clocks that and everything. He had such a huge heart and spot for the Willard House. And knowing that there's someone else not in the family that understood that connection is, I'm just so thankful for your relationship with him. Yeah. Okay. Dan. I do have a list of people that have, I kind of asked to speak. We're going to try and fit, but I know there's some other people as well that want to speak, and we'll fit those in. We are going to fit those in.
Can I use this? Absolutely. My hands are going to start shaking. Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel Huguenin. I'm Peter Huguenin's son, who was a friend of David's. Is that good?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. It is impossible to capture in mere words the significance of a man's life to his friends, to his family, to his church, or to God, but good form, decorum, and love for the deceased and living compels me to make such an attempt. Present, I would utterly fail to accomplish even the faintest of success. Absent, there is some chance my son may achieve what I cannot. A little over 2 decades ago, I met David at the Grafton Congregational Church during a Bible study group. At the time, he was just one of dozens of persons at the church, and by that time, one of hundreds to cross my path. There was no reason to believe he'd be anything other than just one more to come into my life and leave again without so much as a hint of our paths ever having crossed. But there he was. After many discussions, meditations, prayers, and at least one retreat, his passion for what is beautiful and worthy in life shined through. His abiding passion for Christ, church, family, and friends, and his zealous interest in everything from classic clocks and houses to classic cars and sailboats. And I thought, wouldn't this be a fine person to have as a friend? Soon I met Barbara, their children, extended family, and several friends. Margaret, my wife, quickly saw David's fine character and qualities and took to him as well. Over the next 2 decades, we continued our many discussions of Christ, the church, and the struggles and frailties of man, while sharing a good red wine and bread over the table. David once told me of a secret fear that his faith, belief, and love of Christ was perhaps not deep enough or authentic enough, and others might see a darker human side to him and conclude he was a fake, a phony, unworthy to stand in the presence of Christ or the church. But David was no phony in his love of Christ, nor his love of neighbors, friends, and family. His faith, belief, and passions were as authentic as his friendship. Together we traveled into the Finger Lakes of New York, the Bahamas, Costa Rica, and Italy, and had done more had our Lord not required his full attention himself. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Dan. And I know your father wishes he could be here today, and your mother. Please. Stand back here and not on this side.
All right, I want to bring this on a lighter note. I met Barbara 25 years ago working with her. And it was probably 10 years later when I invited her to my wedding that I really got to know Barbara and David. That was 20 years ago. And did you know they closed my wedding at 4 o'clock in the morning dancing? Did you really know that David and Barbara were great dancers? Probably not. That's another thing on the list you did not know. It was wonderful. Then a couple months later, or actually a year or two later, they came to a party on Prudence Island where I live. And it was an October celebration. Come to find out, David is a bull shark. Did anybody know that? He was winning everybody. It was amazing. There are things you just don't know about people until they come to your home. He's a great dancer. He's a bull shark. And these are other things other than his clock-making business, but I only know the fun-loving type of guy David was. I did not know about the clock. Yes, I knew that's what he was and what he did. But I know he loved fishing and sailing and, boy, dancing and bull shark. Wow, those were great things to learn about David. And he was an incredible guy. Every time you met him, there was something new you learned about David. He was quiet, reserved. You spoke to him, he would never answer until he was ready to have the correct answer for you. What else can I say about David? He was great. All right, short and sweet. That's all I wanted to say.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
I like short and sweet.
Debbie, please. Yep. All right, there you go. This is perfect.
I know, I'm here. My name is Debbie Airy. I'm wife to Bruce, who spoke. And we've known each other a long time, like many of you have. We met at church. I watched the boys grow up. We had dinner at their home often. And it wasn't until we started sailing with them that Bruce and I always had an interest in it, but, we never really developed it into anything. And I just, along with Bruce, just loved sailing with him, and then just loved sailing. And then we had a little 27 Bristol, and I outgrew that pretty quick. And we bought a larger boat. And I used to kid David that it was all his fault, because he kind of enticed me to go bigger. And I thank him for that. We had great experiences on the boat, but one of the things that hasn't been mentioned on the boat is I never knew of anybody like Barbara who could whip up a 6-course dinner on a boat. That was her. That was Barbara. You know, I've never tried to duplicate that. But you know, the other thing is, you know, I spent a lot of time in our faith journeys together through Bible study, Lou Genitazio and Barbara, and many others who are not here right now. And those memories and that journey of faith in Christ have, you know, stayed with both of us. I remember one time that David, I was kind of having a hard time with one of our children, and I never said a word to him about it. This was after church coffee hour. I never said a word to him. Somehow he picked up on the emotion, and he kind of stood behind me, beside me, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "Let it go to God." And I did, and I had ever since then. And that was the Holy Spirit working through David, I have no doubt. And it's one of my fondest memories of being a friend of David. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. I have a couple more people on the list that we've specifically asked, but is there anyone else? Yeah, count.
I'll ask a question just to make sure it's valid. But
has anybody ever heard my dad swear? No. Okay. So my dad, one time, I think I was probably 15, and Burgess was a little younger. We had just received skateboards for Christmas, and we weren't really quite sure what to do with them at that point. He had come downstairs, a steep set of stairways came. It was like a back hallway in our house. I'm going to blame it on Burgess. He left the skateboard right in the middle of the hallway. And he had come down the stairways, didn't realize that there was a skateboard in the middle of the hallway. Why should you? And he stepped on it, and he fell backwards, and he hit his head right on the radiator. So that was one story that I probably would have sworn, and he did not. I don't know what he said, but he definitely didn't swear. The second one was we were taking down the chimney in the house first when we moved in, and Burgess was, again Burgess, Burgess was on the roof of the building, and we were like taking the chimney down to put another one up, and thought the best idea was to throw the bricks down and like take them out. And Burgess didn't, and we had some signals going on, like, okay, ready, probably. But somehow Burgess didn't hear the signal, and he threw a brick down, and my dad's hand was in there. And a brick landed from probably 40 feet higher and landed right on my dad's hand. And he yet did not swear. And I never heard my dad swear, which in today's society, I think is something just amazing. So, cheers. I mean, I would have sworn, I would have to admit it. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, so that's just a story of him not swearing. And I think those two stories prove they probably never did.
Yeah. Let's get another one. Pete? I'm sure Pete's got something.
Oh, thanks, Burge. So I've been kind of sitting off on the side listening to all the great stories about David, and a lot of the stories everybody's telling have been very similar to the stories that I remember at David, either out on the boat, or we would always do Christmas dessert with Barbara and David. And I think, David was an amazing craftsman, and anytime I was struggling with something and I needed to get something custom made or something fixed that I couldn't handle myself, David was right down the street. So I go down to David, and David helped me out with this, and always, no question, anything I needed, always helped me out. Something, however, I feel is missed today is, no matter what kind of great work David did, whether it was building a clock or a custom part or whatever it was, probably the two greatest things are his two sons, my friends Burgess and Callum. They're the very best. And I think David deserves a lot of recognition in raising two great sons. And Barbara as well. They wouldn't be the same without you. So, thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Burgess. And thank you, Callum.
Pete, I thought you had something funny to say. John. Oh.
Everybody's stolen my thunder. There's just too many good things to say about David. But you missed several of his great qualities. One of them, he's a plumber. When David and I worked at Willard House together. I was here for 16 years, and he was the first full-time conservator. I'd been here about a year, and then they decided they would hire David, which was the best decision that they've ever made for the museum. David has taken tremendous care of the clocks. We set up a plan. He knew what to do, what not to do, and that's critical when working with clocks, of what not to do, which you leave them alone. But those are the solid days. We had no budget. Nobody got paid much extra money anywhere. The floor was sinking. So David is not only a plumber, he is a contractor. We took the toilet off, rebuilt that whole. He did. I'm his helper. I was the guy with, what do you want me to do? He was doing all this work. He volunteered to do all this work. Completely reconstructed half the floor in the bathroom. David is also a mover. We're going from the high skills to the lower skills, but he had a full range of skills. He moved me from at least one house to another, because when I moved from here, Barbara and David came and helped me clean, because I'd been there for 16 years and it was a disaster. So I'm sure this is sharing a little too much. But Barbara was in it. Barbara and David were always here. Anytime the doors were open, anytime we had an event, David was setting up the tents. Barbara was in the kitchen. Barbara was doing whatever. Anything you needed, they were here working. The museum, honestly, would not be here if David and Barbara had not been here. That was, and I don't know who found David. I don't know how. That's something I'm sure I knew, but I don't remember now how we got here. What was the third thing? I've got my mother's memory. She's in memory care, so it's like I've got a good head start on that. Oh, my last words with David were, Barbara called. I go home to Texas for the summer. And she said, you got to have dinner with us. And so I'm like, oh, that's great. And she said, but David's not well. So not really sure how not well he was. Went, had dinner, had a wonderful evening. He took me in the shop, we went to the bench, he explained and showed me everything about casting. And because I, you know, knew very little, explained to me how he cast the brass and showed me all the clocks that he was so proud of. But he also had a clock full of shop full of clocks that he needed. He said, I got to get rid of these. I've got all these clocks. And so I'm looking, and it's like I'm looking at the, you know, the $10,000 clocks. So we worked our way down to the $100 clocks. So he found me 2 clocks. I said, okay, I'll get these 2. So my last 2 words to David were the check's in the mail. So, no. But David and Barbara have been such good friends.
But just keep going here. Neil, cousin Neil.
So I'm Neil Gow, and David and my father were brothers. David was the younger brother, and my father the older brother. So today I just want to share my first remembrance of my uncle. So my earliest memories of my Uncle David are more than 50 years ago. So my brother, sister, and I were living in Skeen in the farmhouse that my father and uncle were born in. And at that time, Uncle David must have been about 21 years old. And he was living on his own elsewhere in Aberdeen. I don't know if... Was he? 'Cause I don't remember him there. Yeah. So, but the events that stand out from that time. So, I remember him fixing his car in the driveway of the house, and I can remember him clearly. You know, he had worked on that car, and he finally had got it completed. He was so pleased with himself, and he was excited, and he got in, he started the car up, and promptly drove the door into the side of the house and smashed the window. You know, so that stands out because, you know, you're a little kid, you're like, wow, I think you're in trouble now, you know. So, and then, you know, he used to take the 3 of us out. I can recall going out with him. He took us out to the first and only Guy Fawkes bonfire I've ever been to in my life. So, and then trips out. We climbed the hillside behind the house, and this is a hillside that he and my father both spent much of their childhood there, and they collecting eggs, hunting rabbits with slingshots. And I guess if the stories are true, my uncle had a pet ferret that he took with him. So one time, and the story that I did relate to my cousins earlier, but the story that really stood out was one day, Uncle David took the 3 of us out to climb the hill behind the house. And so, okay, it's great. We're going to have this exciting day. We're going to climb this hill. And of course, what he did was he reached out and he got this beautiful case, this binoculars in this leather case. It was beautiful. And he slung it over his shoulder, and off we went. We climbed this hill. And we got to the top, and wow, it's actually sunny here today, you know. So he opens the case, and out come the binoculars. He puts them up to his eyes, and then he comes down, and the look on his face, I can still see the look on his face, and he looks at us. And he wants to know which of us have been playing with his binoculars. Because, of course, that case was beautiful. It had been in the house, and, of course, I was the one that had opened them up and played with them, and I thought I'd put them back okay, but the telltale sign of sticky child fingerprints on the lens was a dead giveaway. So Callum, he didn't swear at me, but he made me walk back home by myself. So.
That's a good one, Neil. Haven't heard that one.
that's what I need. It's like another angle of my dad that, that I hadn't heard yet. So, David, I hope you have something to say.
Hello, everybody. I'm David, Neil's brother and nephew to David Gow. So we shared a lot of things together. David's mom is my grandmother, and she raised Neil and I and my sister Susan. So, just trying to think back, all the stories about David, funny stories, because everybody has kind of resonated with he was really a classy, quality human being, and he was. He really was a kind person, a gentle person. So, from a funny standpoint, I've got a couple. Try to make a funny story. Maybe you won't find it funny. I don't know. We'll see. But I never really saw David angry, but there would be one thing that would tick him off, and it would be phone calls for cuckoo clock repairs. So he considered himself a real, classic, clockmaker repairer. So, phone calls for cuckoo clocks would really get his back up. Yeah. The other story I had was, like Neil said, we live with David at the Croft in Aberdeen, and my earliest memory of David, I guess, was he told me anyway. He mentioned that he would come back from working and he would have candy. He would have candy in his breast pocket, and that I would always try to steal the candy out of his breast pocket, which I thought was interesting because in all of my life I've never put candy in my breast pocket. It seems like he had me set up for that one. Anyway, we lived in Scotland for about a year, and then when my grandfather passed, we came back to the U.S. and I didn't see David for maybe 10 years. The next trip was we did a cross country trip through Canada on a train to Prince George, where we had a fantastic vacation. Callum was just born, and David was such an adventurer. He was taking us out, fishing to the backwoods, and where I saw my first bear in the wilderness, which was exciting. And then panning for gold with Uncle David at an old mine out near Prince George, and playing on the riverbanks of the Fraser River. So after that, David moved to Worcester, where he stayed with us, and he moved in with us with Barbara and the two kids. I was in college at the time, and I remember coming back from a party on campus, and maybe I had been overserved, I think. But and Barbara can remember this because I'm sure. But yeah, yeah. So I'm back, and anyway, I've lost my way in the house, and I ended up in David and Barbara's bedroom, and I was trying to get into bed with David and Barbara, and I was completely horrified. Like,
when I realized that what I was trying to do. But they didn't make much fuss of it. It was, the next day they pulled me aside and, asked if everything was okay. So, anyway, those are some of the fond memories that I have. One last item is, we talked about David, and David had a lot of interests and adventures, and he was into winemaking, and so just a quick story on the winemaking. My dad kind of poo-pooed his winemaking. Didn't take it. When he first started, it wasn't the greatest wine, but over time it got better and better. And so David was a bit of a practical joker. So what he did was he had bought some expensive wines and repackaged his wine into the bottles of expensive wine. And anyway, he served that on the table, and he got my dad on that for sure. My dad thought it was good, and David was all proud. And so, anyway, that's all I've got to say. David, we're going to miss him. Wonderful, wonderful guy, and very sad taken too soon. Thank you.
Yeah, some of my first real memories were at Neil's house when I was just 3. Those were some of my first real memories of Neil and David and at the house. We've got 3 more people on my list. So let's go off the list for one more, and let's do Lou. I could do this all day. And if we're good, just give me some applause that we're good to go. Like, we're ready for some more. Okay.
What David said was really true. David Gow did. It was one thing he did take a sort of a disliking to is his cuckoo clocks, particularly like plastic ones. And one of the things I've got a different story to tell you, but I have to second that because I used to love making prank calls to David's back in the day when there was no number that came up or anything like that. I used to love making prank calls and say, "Oh, I got Mr. Gow. I've got this clock. It's like a little house, and when the man comes out, his hammer is not hitting the cow on the head right." And they would say, "Well, I'm not sure if I can really help you with that. You may want to just buy another one." But one of the greatest things that my wife Barbara and I have been blessed with is really feeling like we're part of the Gow family. And one of the things we were fortunate, so blessed to do is attend the weddings of the sons, which were just like weddings like you dream about a wedding, just the greatest weddings. And Burgess's was a particularly funny thing occurred, or I think it was funny, certainly. We drove out to which lake is it? It's a big lake. Lake Huron. It's a big lake. And so we went to this we rushed out to this lake, and it was just wonderful. We had a great time, and then everything led up to the wedding, of course, the ceremony. And we had a little party ahead of time it was just partying, Barbara, and Kathy and everybody, they made all this wonderful food, pulled pork and all kinds of stuff. So we had this big party before the wedding. It was like a lunch party, I think it was rehearsal dinner thing. And at any rate, so we were fiddling around that morning of the wedding and getting ready. And Barbara, my wife, knows that I'm a very self-centered person. And so she said, "This is a big day for David. Let him we all have these cabins, and we shared a cabin with David and Barbara Gow." So my wife says, "Louis, just for once in your life, let David go ahead of you. Don't think about yourself. Let David get dressed in the fitting room there, in the bedroom rather, where we had all of our, there was one closet we shared. And so David's gonna, so I said, okay, Barb, absolutely. Now, David had this beautiful suit. It was a great suit. I mean, David, people say, you know, the Scotch are tight-fisted. And, I never understood that because David, you know, whatever was the best, the most beautiful, and he managed to get it. And he had this suit that was, it was beautifully tailored. It was a work of art. It really was. And so he had this great suit, and he dashed into, because we were running late, of course, because there was too much talking and fooling around. He dashed in, and you know, we were waiting outside, and we just hear this little voice from inside the room. My suit doesn't fit. Oh, Barbara, my suit doesn't fit. So you said, oh, come on now. David, just suck it up like we women do every day. We pull it in and we put on our clothes and we just get on with it. He says, no, you don't understand. My suit doesn't fit me. I don't understand it. I just tried it on a few weeks ago and it fit perfectly. So he said, oh, I must be bloated. I must have ate too much. I think it was the corn that did it to me. So my wife says, David, I have got some support hose and that you can slip into. So he says, no, this is not funny at all. This isn't funny. So I said, well, David, how bad can it be? So he came out, and the pants, like he could barely move. The pant legs were so snug, and the shirt even was like so tight. And he put the jacket on, and I said, David, this doesn't make any sense because, you know, your arms are way long, and everything's not working with this. And he says, yeah, and besides, this suit is a double-breasted suit. So I said, you're wearing my suit. So he had snuck. I said, you're wearing my suit, David. Take it off before you rip it apart. He's like, oh, thank goodness. And he went scrambling, and he went back in, and he looked great that day, of course. But at any rate, so it was something else. But that was a good one. Timeless.
He has about 8 more stories at that level, but he's holding back. Sandra? Yeah.
So that's me. That's you. I do.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra Leotis, and I've known Barbara and David for over 20 years. We met when we worked on the Grafton Church restoration together, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And my partner David, my partner David Crampton Borden, and I had just the best experience. And we met two of the most incredible couples that we have remained friends with, and it's been very special and just something that we will always treasure. So I was thinking last week when Barbara asked me to just say a few things, I woke up and I thought, how can one remember David Gordon Gow? Not with one word or even several. Many words are needed to describe David Gow, to encompass and reflect the complex depth of the man, the husband, father, brother, friend, and professional whom we've all come to love and greatly admire. So I thought to start with, I will just put some words together for the letters in David's name. So David Gordon Gow, D, deeply devoted to his family, faith, and friends. A, astutely aware and artistic. V, voyager of the sea and virtuous of soul. I,
intelligence in mind and in spirit. D, determined and dedicated to his craft of clockmaking. G, goodness and character. O, original and authentic. R, real in life and actions, never phony. D, dauntless and gutsy. And I saw that when I was on the boat with them. Very gutsy. O, open-hearted and straightforward. N, natural and kind to all. G, greatness without ego. O, open-minded and non-judgmental. W, witty and wise, sly and coy. This sampling of words still cannot match all the characteristics of this divine and fine man. We will miss you deeply, David Gow. Your life and good actions have touched all who knew you and beyond for many lifetimes. Our hearts will always be lifted with the meaning and memories when we think of David Gordon Gow. Thank you for brightening our world with your light. Love, Sandra and David. We'll be deeply missed.
Ron? Just got to keep moving on here. I don't know what else to do.
I kind of wrote a speech that I was going to give, but I think I'll just. You know, I had the privilege of being David's brother-in-law, and the good fortune of getting to meet David while he was still dating Barb. They were just girlfriend, boyfriend at that time. So we went to Scotland with my parents and Barb's parents, and we toured Britain, and we got up there and got a chance to meet David, and he made a good impression both on my parents and Barb's parents, and we were quite pleased when we found out that they were going to get married, and my wife went over to be there at the wedding. So I had the good fortune of being his brother-in-law throughout the years, spending time with him. We had some great times together, whether it was in Prince George or touring in Europe. I think we made 3 trips to Europe together. And but what I've heard here today from everybody is that, you know, David over the last 30 years as all these wonderful things have been said. And it's been wonderful just to listen to what you've all said about David. Everything that's been said about David, I already knew that to be true. And so, like everybody else, we'll miss him, but we won't forget him. He was not just a brother-in-law, but he was a very close friend. And I think all of you saw him as a very close friend. And David, we miss you. We wish you were here. God bless you, and God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Thought of you as a brother. He thought of you as a brother, not a brother-in-law. He was. Every time I saw them together, they were brothers. They were never. bickering, and there were no, but they were just so natural together, weren't they? They were, okay. I have. Not sure if this is. I'm not sure if my sheet is soaked sweat or tears here. Okay. Does anyone else have any? Yeah, Brad.
Hi, I'm Brad Schlepak, and David took me on as a student about 12 years ago, and I spent some time, and both he and Barbara were incredibly kind to me while I was there, and I, you talk about not forgetting someone, but I work on clocks still today, and every day he is behind me, and I always ask myself, what would David do in this situation? And it's true. I was fortunate enough to be in the shop when he was working on the famous Ohio clock from the U.S. Senate, and he was working on many things, but one of the things was he was making a new grommet for the dial, because it's right where you wind the hole. It was missing a grommet, and I used to joke about that sign in there. It was, "Here comes David Gow, grommet maker." And, but one of the last times I talked to him, we were sitting out in the patio, and he was relating the story about the patio and the trials and the tribulations of how long it took to get it done and the problems that incurred. And I said, Barbara must have been livid. And he said, yes. He goes, and so was I. And we were laughing about what would be the male equivalent of hell hath no fury. And he said, and it was probably one of the last things that he said was, beware a patient man. And that was it. Thank you.
Okay. Brad, thank you. Brad is a clockmaker here in Grafton. He's spent a lot of time in the shop over the past few years. And we're thankful for him. We're nearing the end of the list. So, if anyone else would like to speak or say a joke or anything, it's so welcome. Hang on, Mary.
David went out to look at a clock, and he wanted to impress these people, and he dressed up really smart, and he went out, and he came back, and he was so annoyed, and I said, what on earth's the matter? Didn't you get the job? No, it wasn't that at all. I looked down at my feet, and I've got one black shoe on and one brown shoe on.
Thank you, Mary. Okay. If we can all just remember him and not forget him.
We will never forget him.
can. And
I'll remember the party side of them that you guys don't know.
yeah. Well, I think most of us have seen that. So, Mom, we're here for you now. Oh. Okay.
You're wondering how we got connected to Willard Museum. In 1981, we came here visiting David's family and his mom and his brother and the nephew's niece. And of course, we're looking into clock stuff. And Callum is less than a 1 year old in a stroller. We come here. And this was the first visit we'd made here. We bought one of the plaques. We still have it. It's cracked, but we still have it. But that's how we got initially connected to the Willard. But that was also the year of the caterpillars. Do you remember the Willard?
Oh, I remember.
Anyway, they were everywhere. But so I'm protecting my little son, keep the caterpillars. But that's how we met with the Willard Museum. Also, on that trip, we bought the first lathe that David had ever bought. It's this size, beautiful little lathe. He now has about 10. Anybody want to buy a lathe? Anyway, that is the story of how we connected with the Willard House and Clock Museum. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your prayers. And I once, not so long ago, we were saying, the memories, and I said, I can't go there right now. I would be useless. We were on the boat, starting to get ready to get rid of things so we can sell it. And I said to the friends, I can't go there. I wouldn't be able to get anything done. I will have to go there. It's not going to be easy. But the memories of my husband.
I know, Barbara. I know.
Yeah, thank you, Kim.
I know, Barbara.
Yeah. Thank you.
You know I love you.
I know you do. Kim and I worked together for 25 years. Yeah. Thank you. So anyway, thank you again for coming and being here with me, for your support over the time. I'm going to need it. Yeah, I'll always need it. I'm thankful for my sons who are so supportive, their families. God bless you all. And I hope to start reconnecting with people. Everything has been such a shock to us. Everything happened so fast. But memories are there. And I thank God for my husband. We had almost 50 years since I met him. Our 40th anniversary is next week. There we are. Thank you. God bless you all.
He was a great dancer and a great worshiper.
For those of you online, if you're even still there, or if anyone's watching this, if you have something to add for my daughters and nieces' sakes, we would love to hear your story. So if you could send it to my mom or myself, GOW867@gmail or anything. I mean, for me, that is how we keep his memory going, is to have that. So in the future or anything, if it's heard, we want to maybe we'll just compile this into something. So thank you all, and stay as long as we need to until the beer runs out. We may need to start taking a couple things down with things happening tomorrow. So, but the barn is there, and and the food is there. So thank you, everybody. Yep. Thanks for making this so perfect for today.